morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, so whatever time it is for you. I believe most of you are attending from Belgium, hopefully, so it should be morning for you. It's Sunday evening for me, my time. Thank you for attending this session. So let's go through a little bit of introduction about myself. This session is about Dataflow. If you have been in previous session by Wolfgang, that was also a Dataflow session, but I hope we have different coverage of content, so you'll see some different information from what you learned from Wolfgang's session. And if you haven't been in that session, I still will have a little bit of introduction into that area of Dataflow as well. So let's talk about it. First of all, I'm Reza, Microsoft Regional Director and Microsoft MVP based in Auckland, New Zealand. I'm author of some Power BI books. There is one Power BI book available in our website, in Red Hat website, 1,700 pages. You can download most part of it. One part of it is the Power BI Pro architecture, which you can purchase it from a press. So there are lots of content in Red Hat as a Red Hat website, as blogs, as YouTube videos that you can go and learn Power BI for free. These are my contact information. In case you have any questions, feel free to ask me in any of these social media networks, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And before I go to agenda, I would also like to thank Jan for organizing this event. It's a lot of work to organize an event, and he already did like one day of in-person event. This is the remote event of that. So I'm really honored to be as part of this webinar series, and thanks again to Jan. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is a little bit first about what Dataflow is and what that means for you as a Power BI user, because just understanding what technology is not helping you to use it. You also need to know where you can use this technology, right? So I'll talk about some use cases of Dataflow. We'll talk about creating Dataflow, how that piece works. Then there are like different types of entities in Dataflow, an entity called a linked entity, computed entity. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about licensing as well, a little bit how this licensing works in Power BI. I'll explain what common data model is and what is the CDM folder structure. I'll try to finish it in like about 40 minutes, and then we'll leave the rest as Q&A to see how we go. Okay, first thing, what is Dataflow? So you may already heard a lot about Dataflow. You may have been in some presentation about Dataflow, read some blogs about Dataflow. So Dataflow is a Power Query process that can be run, it actually will run in a cloud environment, totally independent from Power BI reports. So there are three main sections in this definition. One is that it is a Power Query transformation. So that means if you are coming from Power BI side, you already know Power Query is an extensive data transformation engine. So we have that engine now available in Dataflow. Another part of it is that it is a cloud technology. That means it's run in cloud, not in desktop. It's just in the cloud in Power BI service. And the third option is, the third part of this definition is that it runs independent from Power BI reports. And that part is one of the main, let's say, advantages of using Dataflow, because it can run totally independent from a Power BI report itself. When you refresh a Power BI report, you refresh all of your queries at the same time. But what if you want to refresh one of those queries separately, right? So this ability to run a Dataflow independent from Power BI report is a really powerful feature, right? So let's see where the output of Dataflow is. So right now you learned that so Dataflow is a Power Query transformation. It runs in the cloud. You can schedule it, of course, but it has to store the data, the output data somewhere, because it's not storing it in a Power BI model. It is storing it somewhere. And then from Power BI, you can connect to it, right? The place that Power Query Dataflows stores data is in Azure Data Lake. And there are different options to use it. The normal Azure Data Lake and the Azure Data Lake Gen 2, right? So you have the option to use it. When you use Power BI service and you use the Dataflow, normal Dataflow in Power BI service, it actually uses the part of, let's say, the space allocated to that from Power BI service, but in the Azure Data Lake storage. So one of the questions that I get from many people is that, so it is a technology that uses Azure Data Lake, and I don't have an Azure Data Lake subscription. I don't even have any idea what Azure Data Lake is, right? So probably this is not a technology for me. The thing is that Dataflow manages that storage itself. You don't need anything. You don't need Azure subscription. You don't need to know what Azure Data Lake is. You don't need to go to Azure portal and create anything. It's all happening in Power BI service. When you create a data flow, it automatically creates a storage for that in Azure Data Lake, and it stores the data there. That said, if you want to use your own Azure Data Lake, if you already know what it is, you have that, let's say, service using in your company, and you want to use that and define it yourself, you can do that. But just generally using Power BI service and Dataflow, you don't need anything extra. It's all built-in part of the Power BI service, right? And the space that you get is also a little bit different. So we'll talk about that when we get to description of that. Okay, so far you learned that it's Power Query running in cloud. It's storing the data in Azure Data Lake, all happening through Power BI website itself. Now let's talk about how you can use it. So after it stores the data into Azure Data Lake, which is the Dataflow storage in Power BI service, you can use that as a normal data source in Power BI. In Power BI, you can say, I want to get data from Dataflow, right? One thing to know is that there are lots of features in Dataflow still in preview mode, beta mode, so we may expect some changes, but definitely there will be a data source in Power BI desktop to get data from Dataflow, and then you can get that table that you loaded through Dataflow process in there. Okay, so this is so far definition of Dataflow. Now, with this definition, you may come up with this question that, okay, I can run queries in Power BI report. I create a PBIX report. I run my queries in there, and then I publish it in the website, and then I schedule it to refresh. So it is still Power Query in cloud, right? So what is the difference? The only thing is that it's not storing in Azure Data Lake. Dataflow is storing in Azure Data Lake, right? But who cares? I don't even need to know, is it storing in Azure Data Lake or it is using in Power BI report, right? The fact is that this ability of running Power Query in cloud independent from Power BI report brings a lot of interesting use cases. So let's talk about those. What are the benefits of using Dataflow, right? So when you use Dataflow, there are some different scenarios. I'll just mention a few of those scenarios here. One of them is that if you have a table that you use it in multiple Power BI reports. If you have worked with Power BI, let's say for a year, for a couple of years, you have a lot of scenarios like that you have one table and you want to use it in multiple Power BI reports. Let's say you have an inventory Power BI report and you have a sales Power BI report. You may also have other Power BI reports, a Power BI report for HR, another Power BI report for purchasing, different Power BI reports, right? Because you have like different audience, so you have different Power BI reports, and the data set for these are also different. In purchasing, you have purchasing tables. In sales, you have sales tables. In inventory, you have inventory tables. However, even considering that scenario, you have some tables which are common between these. And these are usually tables that you populate through a Power Query transformation, right? And there are always tables like that. You cannot say, I don't have that scenario. There are always tables like that. One of these examples is the date table itself. Power BI has its own version of data table, but sometimes that data table is not what you need. You may want to analyze based on fiscal values. You may want to get public holidays. You may want to create your own data table. And when you create your own data table in the sales Power BI report, in the sales PBIX Power BI report, then you have to copy the exact transformation Power Query script into inventory as well, because you may need it in inventory, and you may need it in purchasing because these are all date-based, right? So you create a copy of every one of these. You create a copy in every one of these, and if you change it, then you have to go to change in any of these, all of these, to make it consistent, right? So this is one of the examples that it's not good to have that Power Query, that transformation as a Power Query transformation in your file, because this is something that you may need in multiple files, right? One of the use cases of Dataflow is in this scenario. You will create a Dataflow. You will run that Dataflow only for those common dimensions. Let's say in this case, date dimension is one of those. That just populate date dimension through Power Query script, and it loads it into Azure Data Lake, as I mentioned, right? Now your Power BI files, your sales PBIX file, your inventory PBIX file, and any other PBIX files just get data from that date dimension like a data source. And they get the rest of tables from the other data source, whatever it is, right? So with this way, you are actually reusing one dimension, one table across multiple models, right? You don't need to run that transformation again and again. You don't need to replicate your code and go into the consistency, inconsistency issues and redundancy issues. So it makes the process much easier. That's one of the scenarios, right? Using one Power Query transformation in multiple Power BI reports. Another example scenario is that when you have a table in Power Query, populated in Power Query, but you want to run these on different schedule. Remember that all of queries in a Power BI file run together all at the same time, right? So if you have a Power BI file with 5 queries, when you publish it to the website and when you schedule it to refresh at 9 a.m., at 9 a.m., all of those queries will be refreshed, right? Now, one of those tables might be a table that updates quite frequently. Every, let's say, 5 hours it's update. Every 4 hours it's update. One of the other tables might be a data source that is not updating that much. It's just updating every week, right? Another one is updating every day, right? But when you have all in one Power BI file, when you schedule your Power BI file, all of those will be refreshed at that time, right? So, and you may not need that refresh to be done at that time. What you can do instead is to create 3 different data flows, or as much as needed, right? Based on the schedule that you need, like one data refresh, one data flow to refresh your date dimension. That might be only once a day. One for your sales table, because data is coming a lot in that. You may want to do that every 4 hours, every 2 hours, depends on what you want. One mapping table, it's not changing that much. Let's just refresh it every week. So you can have like multiple data flows. They are all on different schedules. And your Power BI file is reading data from those tables, right? So you still get your most up-to-date data, but much more efficient rather than running the whole refresh every time you want to get the data. That's another scenario of using Dataflow, right? On different schedules of refresh. Another example of that, when you want to build a centralized data warehouse. Now, coming from a traditional BI background, there are lots of companies who are using Power BI inside a fully implemented data warehouse and a BI system. They have their ETL process, they have their data warehouse in SQL Server or some other database technologies, and they build Power BI reports on top of that, right? But not all people have this luxury. Some of them are just bringing data from Excel directly into Power BI, right? Which is fine, but after some time of using Power BI, you realize that because probably like there are lots of challenges bringing all the data in one place, having one integrated place, one centralized data warehouse for the data. So that's a good idea to bring it all in one place. But you've done your transformation with Power Query. Power Query cannot bring it in all in one data warehouse. Now, with Dataflow, you can do that. Dataflow run those Power Query statements and bring data into Azure Data Lake. So Azure Data Lake would become your centralized data warehouse, right? You have to build actually the star schema design in your Azure Data Lake, but it will work that way, right? So that can be replacement as a centralized data warehouse for you. Versioning. When you want to store the data at a specific point of time, like at the end of 2018, let's save a copy of this version. At the end of 2017, let's save a copy of these versions. These can be like different data flows run at only one specific point of the time to load data into a table. And then in Power BI, you can get data from all these different tables and then switch between, right? For this, at the moment, this is like a manual process, but later on, when you combine it with REST API, you probably get this also an automatic process, right? So this is another example scenario of using Dataflow, right? There are a lot of other scenarios of using it, but I just mentioned to you a few scenarios, right? So let's go to the next part and see how this works in action, right? So far we talked about the usage. Let's see how we can work with it. To create a data flow, you need to know a few things first. Data flow is not available in my workspace. It's only available in an app workspace, not my workspace. Consider my workspace as like my document or my desktop. You never really want to put something in production in my desktop or my document, right? So not in my workspace. Dataflow is only available in an app workspace, right? Another thing about Dataflow is that it is only available in Power BI service, not in the desktop. In the desktop, you can get data from the output of a Dataflow, but not the creating, authoring of a Dataflow is not possible in the desktop. And there is also an administrative control around it. So you may not all have Power BI data flows enabled in your tenant, and that might be because there's a Power BI administrator who turned off that feature, right? So there is a control for that can be turned off or on. Okay, so let's have a look to see how Dataflow works and how we can play with that. So I have my Power BI. I have my Power BI service window here. As you can see, I'm in my workspace, and in my workspace, I apparently don't have any content, but even if I have a content, you will see that there is no data flow at the end, right? So I'm going to go to a workspace and create a new workspace, right? So I'll create a new workspace, and I'm creating an app workspace. Let me also enable my zooming tool so you can see it better. And when you create an app workspace, you may know it that there are two different types of app workspace version 1, app workspace version 2. To get the best experience from Dataflow, I would recommend creating app workspace version 2. And how you can create app workspace version 2 by clicking on try now. In this try now button that you see in here, you will have a app workspace version 2. This will at some point it will replace the app workspace version 1, and you will have only one way of creating app workspace. But for now, in the meantime, make sure when you are going to Dataflow, click on this try now. It will give you a new experience of app. I'm calling this Power BI Days workspace, let's say. And I just save it, right? I didn't add anyone into this workspace yet. And I'm skipping this, right? So when I create that app workspace, you should see that there is a data flow section in the section of all of these objects. And under this data flow, I don't have any data flow at the moment. I can create some. To create a data flow, I go to create button at the top, and I say create data flow. There are 3 ways of creating data flow. I start with the simple one. I can define new entities. When we talk about entities, entities means tables, right? So we want to create some new tables. So let's say add new entity, right? You will get an online experience of Power Query in this section. I have the option to choose a data source. So you see these are all different kind of data sources that I can choose. Many of these are things that you already have in Power Query in the Power BI desktop. However, we have much bigger list of data sources. In there, we have like 80 different types of data sources. Not all of them are listed here, but most of them are. And recently, more new data sources are added. Now, I'm going to use one of these data sources. Now, another thing you need to know about Dataflow is that when you use Power BI desktop, you can connect to your local version of SQL Server, you can connect to your Excel file, you can connect to your CSV file and get data from it. That's absolutely fine because your Power BI desktop is on a machine that is locally in your local network. Now we are working in Power BI service, which is not in our local network. It is in the cloud. And if you are getting data from a local data source, you need to have a gateway, right? So for example, if I select Excel, I can put the file path there, but I also need to specify what is the gateway. It won't work without gateway because if this file is coming from a local data source, how this is going to connect, right? So gateway is necessary for data sources that are local, right? You can still have an Excel file in an online source, right? And you can then directly connect to it without gateway. But I'm just mentioning to you that in case you are getting data from a local data source, make sure you select gateway, right? So I'll go back. In this example, I don't have a local data source. I'm connecting to a web data source. It's not a web page, actually. It's OData data source. I'll bring my OData URL here, and I connect to it. An OData URL is a database that you can access to it online. There is at the moment a known bug for this that you need to go and just select a gateway or change something here, then it will allow you to refresh it again. In case it doesn't, I'll bring another one. Okay, so let me do it on my account myself because I have a gateway. Now, when I'm connecting to OData source, you may wonder, okay, why for OData, which is an online data source, you may need gateway. As I said, this is at the moment a work in progress. This is something that is changing. At the moment, it's a little bug that will be fixed quickly. So I'll use my other account, which has a gateway under that. And I already have a workspace created here, so I'm not going to create that workspace again. So let's say I go to this workspace and create a data flow. I'll go to that section quite quickly. So under OData, same path. This time, let's say I select gateway. As you can see, this is a data source that doesn't really need gateway. Then I set it as none, and it will come quickly, right? So that's a little bug, right? So don't worry about that section for OData, right? So here I got all of these tables, and I want to get data from these tables. Let's say I get data from customer table, from orders table, from orders details table. I can get data from all of these. Very similar to Power Query get data experience. Then I click on next. I have Power Query here now. So this is Power Query editor window, similar to Power Query editor window in desktop, but in desktop you have more options. Here we have a little less options over here. Then you can do all transformations that you want. Usually it takes a little bit of time at the beginning to load a preview of data, so I'm waiting for that. Yeah, now that I've got it, I see this Power Query transformation section at the top, right? I can do whatever transformations I want, and then finally I can click on done. That will create a data flow, right? And that data flow will include these 3 tables. Right. Now, I've created this data flow before, so I'm not going to create it again, and I'm not going to explain that with Power Query you can do transformations, because I believe joining this session you already have some experience with Power Query, right? So we are not going to talk about that. I'm canceling this. I'm going to an existing data flow that I have, which has all of those 3 tables in it, right? So these 3 tables are those 3 tables loaded from that OData data source, right? I can even go to those and make some changes if I want. I'll go to the edit section. It will bring that edit scenario for me. I have some other queries as well, but these are those queries that I got from OData data source, right? So creating a data flow is like that. You get data from a source, you do whatever data transformations you want, and when you say done or click on close, you just need to save your data flow. It will become like a data flow like this, that you have all of these tables, and then you can schedule your data flow to refresh, right? So this is my data flow, and here I can refresh it. On the refresh now, if it is online data source, should refresh, or you can even schedule it to refresh, right? You can go to schedule refresh, and then turn on schedule refresh and set whatever schedule you want, right? So that's the data flow side of it. But then how you can use it in Power BI desktop. In the desktop, I'll just bring a desktop window here. In Power BI desktop, you can go to get data, and one of these options is Power BI data flows. So I can get data from Power BI data flows. As you see, I'm in a model that already have something in it, already have a table. I can go to get data, select Power BI data flows. It asks you to log in into Power BI data flow. I'm already logged in, so it won't ask me again to log in. Under data flows, I'll see all of those workspaces that I may have data flow under it. So under this, I have a data flow. I expand that data flow. I have all of those tables. You see, these are those tables I had over there. For example, I select customers and orders. This would be like a normal table. This time, however, I'm reading these, or I'm getting data from these tables. The original data, let's say the source of data, is in Azure Data Lake. It's already populated in Azure Data Lake. I click on load, and this will come as normal tables in Power BI, right? So my Power BI solution has part of data from somewhere else, another part of data from Dataflow, right? So that was a quick demo to show you how Dataflow works, right? But there are still a lot of things about Dataflow, which I'll explain about those. So while this is coming, let me go to that section as well. In Dataflow, we have different types of entities. We have entities called as computed entities. In Power Query, you have like queries, and all of the queries are the same, right? But in Dataflow, you have different kind of entities. Some entities are computed entities, some entities are linked entities. Let me explain what are these different types of entities. When we are talking about a computed entity, it means a query referenced from another query. You have it already in Power Query, and you may already used it a lot in Power Query, in Power BI desktop. You go to a query, right click and say reference, and that will create a new query, right? And that query is like any other query, no difference at all. However, in Dataflow, we call it computed entities, right? And you see a little icon showing that this is a computed entity. Now, why this might be different, why it's not just like a normal query, it's not a reference query. The reason is that these queries are different. These queries are sourcing, so in this case, orders to is referenced from orders, right? Orders already populated, the output of that is already in Azure Data Lake storage, and orders to is reading from that intermediate storage. This is the difference compared to referencing in Power Query. Referencing in Power Query in Power BI Desktop is totally different from referencing a query or an entity in Dataflow. In Dataflow, if you reference from a source, that source is already populated in Azure Data Lake. In Power Query and Power BI Desktop, they both will be populated from the original data source, right? So as a result, computed entities are good for performance. This is a really critical thing to learn about data flows, because if you want to raise the performance, computed entities can be a good option. I'm not saying that you have to always create computed entities, but I'm saying it's a good option. What are examples of that? Let's say you have order details table, but you also need to create a smaller version of that, an aggregated version of that table, and call it, let's say, only order headers, because you are only looking at order headers. You don't want the details, but some of the details aggregated should be in there, right? So you can create a computed entity, reference from your original orders detail entity, apply a group by transformation, and get some output from that, right? This means that this new query will not read data from the original data source. It will read data from the output of the previous table, which is already stored in Azure Data Lake storage. Another type of entity is linked entity. And linked entity are entities that are in another data flow. They are not computed entities. They are in another data flow. You already created one data flow with 10 tables in it, and another data flow with 5 tables. Now, from one data flow, you want to use one of the queries in another data flow. In that case, we call it linked entity. Let me show you how that works in the Power BI itself. So I'll go back to my data flows. First, showing you not a linked entity. First, I want to show you a computed entity. So I'll go to my edit entities, which is similar to edit queries in Power BI Desktop. Now I right click on these orders, for example, and create a reference from this. And my reference version, you can see it's different a little bit with that icon, and it's also saying that it is a computed entity. One thing to know is that computed entities are only premium feature. It's not a feature for Power BI Pro. With Dataflow, you can use it with Power BI Pro, but some of the features like computed entities or linked entities, these are only available in these are only available in the premium feature, right? Another type of entity, I just canceled this. Another type of entity you can add is a linked entity. And that means, let's say I want to get a query from another data flow. So I go to add linked entities. I'll have the option to choose from another data flow. I'm already signed in. Let's say from this data flow, from this, I just select this table, right? And that table has data like this. I click on next. It will come as part of my queries here, but you can see it has also its own icon. These entities cannot be modified. You cannot edit it. You can actually right click, delete something. But then when you want to close or let's say done, it tells you that these transformations cannot be done here, right? So you can play with it, but not really save it this way. The main transformation is already in the other data flow, right? And these are also a premium feature, right? So both of these functions are premium features. You need premium to get these features. One of the misconceptions about Dataflow is that a lot of people think that Dataflow is all premium functionality. No, Dataflow is available for Pro as well, but some of the functions of that is premium only. Okay, now let's talk about common data model in this remaining time. Common data model is an important concept that you need to learn talking about Dataflow. What is common data model? When we have multiple applications and each application has its own database, and there are also some other databases that probably doesn't have any application, like an Excel file that a salesperson keeps for themselves to keep track of leads that they have and contacts, right? Every one of these is like an application, a database, and these applications want to talk with each other. Let's say an ERP application here wants to talk with the ERP database, but also wants to talk with the database of customers in the website, with a database of sales somewhere else, with an accounting database. Every application should be related to one of these, and it creates a mesh like that, right? It's a big challenge in integration when you have silos of data. Now, what is always preferred is to have an integrated solution, to have a shared data model. When I say shared data model, it means like a database, right? Shared database, somewhere in between. All of these databases can talk with that. They can pass their data into that template and store it in that template. All applications understand that template, can read data from that template. In that case, integration is really easy. If you add a new application, it's just a link to this. In previous model, if you added a new application, you needed to add that integration to all of data sources separately, right? So the shared data model is definitely a preferred approach for integration. As I said, Dataflow came to do a lot of integration. That's the title of our session, right? Integration solution for Power BI. Now that you know shared data model is good, so what is common data model? Common data model is a shared data model. It's a shared data model that already has a lot of database tables, but these database tables doesn't have any data in it. It's just a template. There are more than 250 database table templates in common data model, like a table for account, a table for invoice, a table for, let's say, a table for sales, a table for account, a table for different kind of things, right? When you work with a lot of systems, you have the same account table across all of those. You have the same, let's say, sales table across all of those. You may have like some fields different, but most of that is the same. That's where the common data model concept came from. It started from Dynamics 365 because they have a lot of different functions and models in it. So it's a common data model built based on that, and you can see many of these entities are coming from there. But then it expanded to many other places, right? So what is common data model again? It's a shared database, shared data model with a lot of database table templates, no data in it, which you can plug it to your data source and load data into that, right? Common data model is a Microsoft, let's say, kind of database. It's available in GitHub as well. You can use it in many Microsoft technologies. In Dynamics 365, as I said, it stores the data into Azure Data Lake. Power BI can connect to common data services. Office 365 can connect to that. Azure services can talk with that. Azure Data Break, Azure Machine Learning, Azure SQL Database, Azure Data Factory, and some other technologies are coming into that as well. If you've seen Satya's announcement about integration of SAP, Adobe, and Microsoft together, those are also coming into that scenario, right? So common data model is a centralized database with predefined table formats that you can load data in it, right? Now, what is the usage of that? What's the understanding of what is, let's say, the usage of that in Dataflow? Because in Dataflow, with Power BI Dataflows, you can load data into a common data model, right? when you load data into common data model, it stores it in in a shared model. And the benefit of that is that now you can have applications which are decoupled from data source. You can have a Power BI report. This is a sales Power BI report, let's say. Let me just show it to you, like this one. A sales Power BI report, and this is not sales, this is higher education accelerator. Let's say this is a Power BI report for education. And when you want to use it in another education scenario, you have the same kind of model, right? Same kind of report. You have to just connect it to different data fields. So what if this talks with a common data model and you just need to change the source to that common data model, right? How this all works, again, going back to the demo, in Power BI, when you have a table, you can map it to a common data model. How it works in the Dataflow, we have this option, map to standard, which maps that data into a standard entity. And when I go to map to standard under entity type, I see all of different kind of entities. So this is a sales table, so I should be able to find something under sales, or what is that? This is actually a product table. Okay, so I can go to product, product table, and I can map these fields to the fields related to that in the product, right? As you can see, some of these are already mapping, like name to name, organization ID to organization ID. If you want to change something, you can, however, change it as well. And that loads data into that table. Then from Power BI desktop and from other applications, you can read it. This common data model is available in Power App, in Microsoft Flow, in many other Azure Data technologies, right? Okay, so I just go through the last section of this presentation, and then we'll talk about the questions and answering. Just a little bit of common data model internals. So CDM means common data model. So how common data model stores data? First, it stores data into Azure Data Lake, into folders called CDM folders. CDM folders includes this structure. So you have the technology. Under that technology, let's say Power BI, you have workspaces. Under workspaces, Dataflows and common data folders are under that. This is an example of that, right? In every folder, you have a JSON file, which is the metadata of that transformations, and the number of CSV files. So how that works, let's say for the example we created, for this example, let me just cancel this. For this example, we have a JSON file, and these all are CSV files, right? So in this folder, we have 4 CSV files. If you go and see that folder structure, you will see it. And also this data flow itself, if I go back, close, I can download that JSON file or export that JSON file, right? And when I open it, it would be a file. Let me just open it in another window. It would be a file with JSON format, so like this, right? It has all of the information in it. Now, what this file includes this information. It includes every entity information, description of the data flow, the name of the data flow, all entities in it, every entity information, references, relationships, some annotations, and the Power Query statements itself. You can see all of these. You can see even the Power Query MS script. So that's the structure of this. There are a lot of information about the structure of a CDM folder. I just explained a little bit around that to give you some ideas about how this works. Dataflows also working with the REST API. There are some REST API functions for Dataflow. Okay, now I just do the licensing. I'll already talk about that. Everything is possible in Pro. Differences is the schedule refresh, similar to Pro and Premium, or the total storage, and linked entities, computed entities, incremental refresh. These are mainly not possible in Pro. Everything else is almost possible. So in summary, we talked about these. Dataflow, what is it? Scenarios of use cases for that, creating data flows, entity types, licensing, common data models, CDM folder structure. Every one of these sections has a lot of details. I already written some blog posts about this, and some blog posts are coming upcoming this week, so you can stay tuned for that. I also written a Power BI Pro architecture book, which you can connect and read this and get some information from that. References to study more about Power BI. The link to the book that I said is available for free. Dataflow articles that I published, 2 of these are already available, more are coming this week. Matthew Roche published a really great series on Dataflow. I highly recommend reading that. And Microsoft has good documentation on Dataflow as well. Okay, so I tried to be as quick as possible. Do we have any questions in this, let's say, 7 minutes, 6, 7 minutes?
Are custom functions allowed in Power Query Online?
Pardon, can you please repeat?
Custom functions, are those allowed in Power Query Online?
Yes, it is. So even I can show it here. Now, the thing is that you cannot create it with the graphical interface. In Power Query Desktop, you have graphical interface. In the in the website, when I go to my edit queries, I can even show it to you that I can create a function. I already have a function here. Right? But the thing is that there is no graphical option to create it. You have to write the script yourself, or you have to create it in the desktop, then copy that script, bring it here, because you can get data from blank query. But the short answer, yes, functions, custom functions are available in the Dataflow.
Okay, cool. The 10 gigabyte limit for Dataflow for Pro users, that is separate from the 10 gigabyte limit for data and reports, right? Or is it?
No, unfortunately. So that's the 10 gigabyte space that you have for everything, for reports, for data flow storage, everything that you store in Power BI service, basically.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
There was a question about the computed entity, if it requires a premium license, but you answered that already during your session. So apart from that, everybody is saying thanks. So with
Right.
that, if nobody else has any questions, I'm saying thank you as well. Anushree is even saying, sorry, Anushree is even saying, wonderful session. I'm a newbie to Power BI. Wish we had sessions like Dashboard in a Day in Bangalore, India, as we have in New York. So if you ever go there, if you know people, make sure they go do Dashboards in a Day in India.
I believe there should be some. Yeah, I've been last year over there, but yeah, not sure when the next time I'll be there.
Yeah, what's it called? The SQL Server guys there, Data Platform Geeks, is it that?
Yes, I'm running a really good conference over there called Data Platform Geeks. It's now called as Data Platform Geeks or Data Platform Summit, maybe Data Platform Summit. It's an awesome conference. It has a lot of Power BI content in it as well.
Yeah, so that's an option for people in India.
Yes.
The slides, if they will be provided. So that's something I ask every speaker. If you're okay with me posting the recording on our YouTube channel on recordings.powerbi.com, and if you're willing to share your slides.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you the slides, and then you can share it with all audience.
Cool. Okay. Carl is very happy about that. Okay, great. That's it. Thank you very much, Reza, for doing this. Late in the evening for you, early in the morning for the rest of us. So have a good evening and have a good work week.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for joining. Have a good rest of your day.